Hey, this is Derek, and listen to Skepticality, the official audio program of Skeptic Magazine, for Tuesday, October 30th, 2012.
Skepticality. Science!
Welcome back to another episode of Skepticality, the show that features interviews and news with people from all walks of life for the promotion of critical thought and science. So, I know all of you realize that Halloween is close at hand. And since our poor Tim Farley is dealing with a typical October haunting, this week we have Bob Carroll as our first presenter.
This is Bob Carroll, creator of the Skeptic's Dictionary and the blog Unnatural Acts That Can Improve Your Thinking. Welcome to another episode of Unnatural Virtue. Today's topic is automatic writing. Automatic writing is writing allegedly directed by a spirit or by the unconscious mind. It's sometimes called trance writing because it's done quickly and without judgment, writing whatever comes to mind, as if in a trance. Believers think this allows one to tap into the subconscious mind where the true self dwells, and where, uninhibited by the conscious mind, deep and mystical thoughts can be accessed. Trance writing is also used by some psychotherapists who think it's a quick way to release repressed memories. However, there's no compelling scientific evidence that trance writing has any unique therapeutic value. Some advocates of automatic writing claim that the process allows them to access other intelligences and entities for information and guidance. Some claim that it permits them to recall previously irretrievable data from the subconscious mind and to unleash spiritual energy for personal growth and revelation. One 19th century medium, Helen Smith, also known as Catherine Muller, specialized in automatic writing and even invented a Martian alphabet to convey messages to her clients in the Martian language. Martian has a strong resemblance to Smith's native language, French, according to Theodore Flournay, a professor of psychology. Flournay studied Smith over a period of several years, and in 1900 published his findings in a book called From India to the Planet Mars, a study of a case of somnambulism with glossolalia. Flournay concluded that Helen Smith's revelations were merely romances of the subliminal imagination, derived largely from forgotten sources. For example, books read as a child. He subsequently coined the term cryptomnesia to describe the phenomenon. Flournay also concluded that Helen Smith's spirit guide, Leopold, was merely an unconscious subpersonality. Skeptics consider automatic writing to be little more than a parlor game, although sometimes useful for self-discovery and for getting started on a writing project. While it's likely that many unconscious desires and ideas are expressed in automatic writing, the evidence doesn't suggest that they are any more profound than one's conscious notions. There is no more evidence that the true self is in the unconscious than there is that the true self is revealed while drunk, talking in your sleep, or raving in a psychotic break. Automatic writing may enhance personal growth if it's evaluated reflectively and with creative intelligence. By itself, automatic writing is no more likely to produce self-growth or worthwhile revelation than any other human activity. In fact, some people have had such bad experiences doing automatic writing that they're convinced that Satan is behind it. But that's a topic for another time. For some minds, apparently, it's better not to know what's lurking in the nether regions of consciousness. Others may be disappointed to find that the cellar is empty. Well, that's it for this episode of Unnatural Virtue. To find out more about the topics mentioned here, see my website, The Skeptic's Dictionary. In the meantime, please commit some unnatural acts in public, and don't forget, skepticism, though unnatural, is a virtue.
Hello, and welcome to The Odds Must Be Crazy on Skepticality, where we help you escape your bizarre, tiring, overworked life and tell you strange stories submitted by other people who live bizarre, tiring, overworked lives just like you. Only they emailed us stories. Hint, hint.
I'm Jarrett Kaufman.
And I'm Wendy Hughes.
And we're here to tell you stories that will make you do a double take.
Or maybe even a triple take.
Always the optimist, Wendy.
I can't help it. I love what we do. Anyway, this week's story was submitted to us by blog reader Stephen C. As always, our readers can find this story on our site starting today under the title The Subsequent Steve, or via the link on the show notes. Steve begins.
I live in Miami, Florida. A few years ago, I met a woman who was down visiting from the Midwest, and we hit it off. After we'd conducted a long-distance relationship for several months, she decided to leave her home and her faculty position at a well-known university to move down and start a new life with me. I said I was not ready to commit, but she insisted on coming. Within weeks of her move down, we broke up and stopped speaking to each other. She, however, remained in Florida and started a new job. Flash forward a year. I heard through mutual friends that she met a new guy, also named Steve. Apparently he was head over heels about her, but she didn't want to commit to her new Steve, mostly because she couldn't shake the thought of me and of our tumultuous, highly emotional, though brief relationship. This went on for months. The new Steve kept asking her to marry him, but she refused. This time, she was the one who was not ready. Flash forward another year. I took a solo road trip to Nova Scotia. After driving 2,400 miles, I stopped to do some writing, settling into a secluded cabin at a remote resort on the outskirts of Dingwall on the tip of Cape Breton. While sitting at the table in my cabin one day, I noticed a blonde woman and a man walking down by the water. They were a little too far away for me to recognize. Later, when I went down to the office, the owner of the resort exclaimed, "What a coincidence! We never have guests from Miami, and today a couple more stopped by, though they didn't stay." She handed me a business card. It was my ex-girlfriend. I heard the rest of the story from our mutual friends back in Miami. It turns out that, after a year of resisting her new boyfriend's pleas to get engaged, she turned to him that day, standing by the water in remote and tiny Dingwall, and, not knowing that I was in a cabin watching them 100 yards away, said, "Yes, I will marry you, and we'll get married here, right on this spot." The following summer, they and both their families traveled to Dingwall for the wedding.
Isn't that romantic? I can picture the man watching from the cabin and seeing his old girlfriend and her new beau. It seems like there are more than one coincidence in that story.
When our friend and advisor, cognitive psychologist Barbara Drescher, reviewed the story, she homed in on the names and on the location.
Was there any significance to the names?
Not especially. Barbara said that according to Babycenter.com, the name Stephen, with a V, was among the top 30 from 1946 through 1992. And Stephen with a PH, which is also shortened to Steve, was equally as popular. So the probability that she would meet another man named Stephen is actually quite high.
So what did Barbara think about the old Steve seeing his old girlfriend and the new Steve?
This one was more interesting than the names, obviously. According to Barbara, the probability of the author being at the same place, more than 2,000 miles from home, at the same time is very difficult to calculate, and probably quite low. But there are some things that make it more likely than what we encounter most of the time. The probability that the person seen walking on the beach is a specific total stranger. If they dated, they must have quite a bit in common, making it more likely that they would be interested in visiting similar places. It is also possible that one of them mentioned wanting to visit that location to the other. Regarding the timing, a number of factors increase these odds as well. We must consider that Nova Scotia is a seasonal destination, reducing the time frame of a possible encounter. It is also not so odd that the woman would accept a proposal while walking on the beach at a beautiful, secluded, romantic location.
So, it's a case of a common name and a seasonal vacation spot.
Absolutely. When you analyze data to discover the frequency of names given to babies in a given year, or vacation destinations in a given season, you drastically increase the odds that occasionally you'll see this sort of situation. Although I still think the chance that he'd catch them at seemingly the moment of proposal, and that the resort owner would think to mention it and even provide her card, is pretty surprising.
And I still think it's quite romantic.
All's well that ends well. Well, except for old Steve.
Thanks for listening to The Odds Must Be Crazy on Skepticality. Please be sure to visit theoddsmustbecrazy.com to read our other stories and lend your all-important voice to the comment threads. If you don't, and we got something wrong, it will be entirely your fault. In the meantime, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, circle us on Google+, and validate us in life. Hit the Submit a Story link on our site to share your own crazy stories. Or tweet the short ones with the hashtag TOMBC.
The Odds Must Be Crazy is a project in collaboration with the Independent Investigations Group in Los Angeles, California. Visit them at iigwest.org. Barbara Drescher is a contributing editor to our blog and can also be found at icbseverywhere.com.
Special thanks to our producer and sound engineer, Brian Hart. Our theme music comes to us courtesy of Mr. Deity himself, Brian Keith Dalton. You can find him at MrDeity.com. And until the next episode, we suggest taking a few trips to exotic destinations and wistfully watching the most iconic spots to see if any of your ex-lovers are there, happily enjoying a vacation with someone who isn't you.
Seriously, Wendy, I think you might need help.
Help with what?
Thanks again to Wendy, Jarrett, and Bob. So this week's guest is Caitlin Doughty, a licensed mortician and founder of the Order of the Good Death. Since death has a lot of stigmas around it, Caitlin has set out to change how society thinks about death and think about the topic in a more rational manner. After a few listeners pointed me to her content, I had to get her on the show. And what a better time other than the end of October.
Die someday. Live forever. Die someday. Live forever. Die someday.
So today I am here with Caitlin Doughty.
Doughty.
Oh, see? Oh, there's no R. There's no R. I put a dart in there.
You know, people always put like ERs and J's and just weird letters in it. It invites that sort of.
Well, you know, my last name is Colanduno, and it sounds exactly like it's spelled. So many people read my last name on paper, and they always want to put more letters in it. So
right.
I understand that. So, what made a very innocent girl from the beautiful island of Oahu get into the death industry?
Well, I actually, there's death everywhere, even in the tropics. And I actually saw kind of a traumatic death when I was younger. And it really kind of set me on this path of, even though I didn't totally understand it, of the morbid forces sort of guiding me. And everything that I did, I ultimately ended up having sort of a morbid or macabre bent to it, even when I was trying to do totally innocuous things like the editor of the yearbook, or, it ended up going down the one-way morbid track. So when I graduated from college, I had a medieval history degree. I decided that I was going to move to San Francisco, and I had been working in San Francisco for about a year, and I was like, you know what, I might as well just embrace these impulses that I have. I think I want to ultimately own a funeral home, and so I want to get into the industry to see if it's actually something I can handle. So I tried to get a job as a crematory operator and ultimately did. And sort of the second that I walked in, the first day, I was like, okay, I know it just sort of fell into place in a very eerie way. And I knew exactly that this is what I was supposed to be doing, and I've been doing it for almost 5 years now.
Well, they always say to do what you love, so.
Right, yeah, and that is certainly the case for me. I mean, it's weird because it borders on sort of a compulsion, but also a love. So I love it, but it's also not like if, someone was like, we're going to pay you $1 million to play Scrabble all day, I still wouldn't be able to stop, because it's a compulsion. It's something that I need to do.
Well, I imagine your house must be decorated very interestingly.
It is. I like a lot of really old family photographs, a lot of sort of memento mori, a lot of like sort of darker antique pieces that I collect. So it's sort of, I like to think that my house is fun and interesting, but there's probably an element of it being kind of predictable too.
Like my wife always says about our roommate, Swoopy, because she has a lot of death-like things in her room because she loves that stuff as well. And my wife always calls it the creepy collection.
Yeah, it's pretty much a creepy collection. And I try not have collections like hoarded away. I try to have everything that I like out. Because there's some quote that's like, only have things that, that you love or make you, or are useful. So don't have anything else that's just junk. Have, only things that are like a blender that you need or that are just absolutely beautiful and that you love to look at every day.
You're saying you don't have a death blender?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's shaped like a giant skull.
Oh, you see? I knew it. So, how does someone become a mortician? Because it's not a doctor. So, so how do you get about doing that?
Well, there's a couple of different options. It's kind of hard to give really solid advice because every state has completely different regulations, which is kind of a problem in and of itself. For example, California, I actually went to a mortuary science school, which is kind of the traditional route to becoming a mortician. But in California, where I live, I actually could have just taken this big test because I already had a degree. I could have taken a big test and sort of just walked in and been a funeral director, and I couldn't have been an embalmer. So that's sort of an issue too, is that there's two separate licenses, one for funeral directors and one for embalmers, which do the sort of preservation techniques. So I went to the traditional route, though, would be to go to a mortuary science school, and then that's usually about roughly 2 years. And then you come out of that. It's actually pretty hard. I was expecting, because I had a bachelor's degree from kind of a nerd school, I thought that I was like, oh, this is not going to be any problem. And then I was surprised at how much, it's anatomy and science and accounting and, all sorts of stuff. So I was surprised at how difficult it was. So I would caution anybody who wants to do it to really be prepared for that. And really go into it knowing that this is not going to be like, I'm working in death, I'm so creepy and awesome. And there is an element to that, and it is fun and it is awesome and fascinating, but it's also a lot of work.
What is your quote-unquote normal work day then?
Well, it's actually really sort of in flux right now, because I just got a book deal, which is awesome in Bizarro world.
I know I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. So everything is kind of, so my day job is I work as a funeral director at a green cremation company, which means that I work at the crematory, but I also work in a lot of bureaucracy, basically working with families, working with the coroner's office, working with death certificates, that sort of thing. But since I have this book deal now, I'm going to be taking some time off. I'm already working on starting my own funeral home as well. So there's kind of a lot of stuff going on right now, but all of it very, very positive and exciting.
So yeah, you're in the LA area, right?
Yes, I'm in Los Angeles.
Now, what exactly is the Order of the Good Death?
The Order of the Good Death is a website group that I started basically to bring together. I didn't want to have, I know that I wanted to start putting myself out there as someone who, is sort of trying to bring death and a rational discussion of death back into culture. But I didn't want it to be like CaitlinDoughty.com, here we are, come on down, death expert, because that seemed a little tacky to me. So I thought about all the people that I knew that I had collaborated with who were artists or writers or friends of mine, who also had a real death bent to their work. And I thought about creating a group then of people so that we could ultimately, and we are doing this now, add more people as sort of people came out of the woodwork and I got into contact with people whose work I respected, and just have really a sort of central place where people who their main focus is death, whether they're academics or writers or artists, sort of come together and celebrate the new way of death in the Western world.
Well, yeah, and I noticed it because on the website you have that whole section with the order members. Mm-hmm. So when I look at that list, there's so many different skill sets behind the people that are on that list.
Right.
And so what are your secret plans with all those people?
World domination, obviously. Yeah. Well, there's actually a bunch of new people being added now, too, because in the process of having the videos that I make and putting out the essays that I write and everything, I've been able to become friends with a lot of other incredibly fascinating, impressive people in the death world. So, for right now, basically it's about, I'd like, if somebody came to the website, I'd like for them to be able to look at those people and first of all be inspired and say, okay, look at this, look at how many people are doing this, look at how many, and that there's a place for me in designing shrouds or, going into this field. There's really a place for me because there's a lot of fascinating people doing this. But also, hopefully it will be and death lends itself to being very, very interdisciplinary, because, death sort of has its cold dark hand in everything, really. So there's really a place for all of these people to work together and to work with me in a way to create new types of projects and new types of art.
So I didn't notice a place where people can apply. What if somebody wants to be part of the Order of the Good Death? Is there a way to do that?
Right. Well, there's sort of two. I'm trying to take two tacks here. I want to have one place where it's people who are actually, it's professionally, it's what they do, is involved in death in somewhere, and that would be the main order page. But I also want it, I would love ultimately for it to be something kind of like Girl Scouts, where you like sign up and you're part of this and you're taking a pledge to work towards the good death and to be open and honest about death in our society. So that's all sort of in the works. But if you are you are someone who's very seriously working in the death industry or on a death discipline in some way, then I would love for you to email me and consider working together.
Very cool. So you mentioned your videos. You have most of them on YouTube, and so those started about like a year ago.
Yeah, about almost exactly a year ago. Yeah.
Recently, the Huffington Post actually highlighted one of your newer videos, the Gets Better video, which is kind of like a take on the Let's Get Better videos from they have about like people are like in alternative lifestyles and things.
Right.
And so you did that one about it gets better if you're a younger person who probably like you when they were younger is fascinated with things like death.
Yes, a little morbid child. Yeah, exactly. I was actually, weirdly enough, Dan Savage, who is the columnist who first created the It Gets Better videos for LGBT youth, I actually had thought about doing this video because it seemed like an interesting take on it, and I do get a lot of emails from young people saying, I really want to do what you do, or I want to pursue this, or I'm so glad there's a place that I can be interested in death because everybody around me is telling me that it's weird and deviant in some way. And so I just wanted to make a video saying, oh my God, no, it's not. And so that morning I recorded the video, and then I got an email from Dan Savage, totally unrelated, wanting me to help on a question that somebody had given him about getting AIDS from a dead body. And so that was the perfect opportunity for me to be like, oh, hello. I'm so glad you're here. Is it okay if I make this video? I don't want it to be, it's not supposed to be a parody at all. It's supposed to be sort of a celebration of, all sort of kids who feel maligned in some way.
Yeah, I want to make sure that when I said that, I don't think that when you did that video, it doesn't even look like a parody or anything. Actually, it's pretty serious.
No. Yeah, and he was very gracious and got it right away. He said, I get that, that sounds like it would be an homage, to the original concept. And I certainly, the last thing I wanted is for especially anyone in the LGBT community to be offended, or something to think that I was trying to. It was certainly the tone was not mocking at all, and they actually the Huffington Post put it in the comedy section.
They did,
which was like I was like, okay, I guess I'm glad it's on the Huffington Post. It's great, but it's not comedy. Like it was actually very. I meant it very seriously, So, but I guess any place that it's shared is good.
I imagine that's the reason I did that because of the fact that it's October.
Right. Yeah. October is a very. It's a very busy month for me.
Yeah.
Because it's very like, who could we have? Oh, I know, there's a mortician. Like, let's have the mortician on. Which is not a bad thing at all. It's the most wonderful time of the year. So.
Okay, so I was going to let it go by, but I just can't. So, Dan Savage had a question about somebody asked if they could get AIDS from a dead body.
Yes, yeah, that was the question. Apparently, he was at he does college tours, and he was at a college, and someone asked him that, and he was like, I'm really rarely stumped on any questions, but I actually didn't know. And the answer that I gave him was that, first of all, unless this is a thinly veiled necrophilia question, the answer is no, because basically the amount of interaction that a normal person would have with a dead body, it's sort of, ultimately, ideally it would be, with the dead body and maybe washing them a little bit and shrouding them, and being with their body, you couldn't get AIDS or an STI from a body like that any more than you would get that from interaction like that with a living person. So unless you're somebody like an EMT or a coroner or an embalmer where you're just basically, covered in the deceased's blood because of what you're doing on autopsy or embalming, there shouldn't be any risk to you at all. It's not like, all of a sudden when you die, the AIDS floats out into the air or something. It's probably very, very safe for you.
Yeah, that was one of those things I wouldn't have never imagined to ask.
Right, which is probably why he was stumped on it, because it's not one he gets all the time.
So you're not being featured on the Huffington Post is not really something new to you, because you've been interviewed by NPR.
Yes, and I've actually been on the Huffington Post before too. Yeah, it's very weird. Ultimately when I set out to do this stuff, what I wanted to be ultimately, when I was thinking very, very far in the future, is building up my career and ultimately being a sort of public death intellectual, going out into the community and hoping that people ask me questions and hoping that people are interested in death. But it's all happened kind of a lot quicker than I expected it to. And I can only attribute it to the fact that there's a real hole in the market for people talking about death and having that conversation. So if I'm there doing it, people are going to be interested in it. Yeah,
because one of I think it was on a blog post where you mentioned that one of the things your goals was to make sure that people accept that death is natural, and the anxiety that we have currently in culture is just bizarre, because in the past, death was not really as forbidden of a subject as it is now.
Absolutely. Well, it really couldn't be, because people were dying all the time. Up until, we've had a really profound sort of sanitation and medical advances in the past 75 to 100 years, which are wonderful, of course. Advances in medicine are wonderful, but it's also really completely taken death out of culture in a lot of ways, because, as it is now, if it were 100 years ago, probably one or both of us would be dead at this point.
Yeah.
You said you had a wife and a roommate. One or both of them would probably be dead. If you had 5 kids, maybe 3 of them would live past 5. Death was just a sort of constant presence. So you really had to have a completely different attitude about it. Denial was not as easy. It was not handed to us on a silver platter like it is now. So the way that we feel about death really is entirely culturally determined in a lot of ways. But that also means that we can change culture, and that means that we can redefine how we feel about death if it's something that we say that we value and that's important to us.
Yeah, because I remember when my great-grandmother used to tell me about things when she was growing up. She told me about when she and her mom had to prepare her grandmother. Right. And I always found that fascinating because it's so foreign.
Yeah, and that's actually sort of one of my main things, the main tenets of my life, is to get people to do that, is to get people to go back to the actual physical care of the dead body themselves. And, if somebody dies in the home, what I would want to do as a funeral director is be the person that comes just to sort of facilitate them taking care of the dead body, them washing it and shrouding it and laying out and having a wake for it. Because I think that there's nothing that reminds us realistically of our mortality more than a corpse. There it is. And it's you're not only taking that time to realize that the person is very dead and that they're not coming back and that your life is going to be different now, but you're also using the corpse as a reminder that you too are on a finite timeline here, and that you're moving towards death as well. So there's a lot of really positive things that come out of realistic interaction with a dead body.
And it probably helps people kind of move on, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely, because you realize that, again, that this person is not coming back. This is it. And, the way that embalmers work, and I respect, and I know a lot of embalmers and absolutely respect them, but the way that they work is that they sort of try to create a lifelike appearance. They put them in a suit and they put, rosy cheeks, and they try and bring them back to life a little bit. But I think that seeing a dead body being dead is what's really important, because it should look like a corpse. It should look very dead, because that's what helps you make the positive transition in your mind away from seeing this person as alive.
So you mentioned it already, but you have a book coming out as The Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Purgatory.
Yes.
So how'd that come about?
Well, I actually got when the Ask a Mortician videos became more popular. I got a few people, a few literary agencies saying, we'd love to work with you. But some of them were a little more, not necessarily who I would choose to work with. But then I got one woman from the Ross Yoon agency in Washington D.C. Who they put out books that were exactly up my alley. So we put together a book proposal, and I didn't know how this worked, by the way, prior to this. This is all like a magical mystery to me. We put together about a 75-page book proposal, and she, as my agent, sent it out to all these various publishing houses to see if they would be interested. And then I actually flew to New York and had sort of these whirlwind meetings with publishing houses, and then there was what's called a book auction, where they sort of bid back and forth on it, and the winner wins. Unfortunately, it couldn't have been a better outcome for me, and it's really horribly exciting.
Which publishing house is going to be with?
It's W.W. Norton.
Oh, Norton. Okay.
They do Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah.
They do Edward O. Wilson.
Yeah, I know.
They have Mary Roach.
Yes.
So they just do all sorts of people that I am, I'm just tickled. Yeah, I'm thrilled, and there's a lot of I put a lot of pressure on myself, obviously, so I take this very seriously. But I hope, I couldn't be in better hands. So now it's really up to me. It's not like I can complain about, the editor wasn't very good or the publishing house wasn't very good. It's like, no, unless you got to be really good here, because everything else is in place in a really positive way for you. So get your stuff together and turn out something good.
So going back to your YouTube videos, because I have to tell everybody that they should go look at them because they're really, really entertaining.
Thank you.
And one of my favorite was the episode where you talked about baking a cake from a dead body.
Yes. So somebody asked, and this was about the 4th or 5th episode, and the structure of the show is that people call and ask me questions about, email or YouTube me questions about death. Although there should be a hotline. That's a good idea. But at that point I was kind of testing the waters a little bit, because every new episode I was like, this is going to be the one that's going to freak people out. This is going to be the one that people are like, oh, well, you have gone too far, young lady. I'm done with you. So I was kind of testing the waters, and I got a question that was said, can you bake ashes, cremated remains into a cake, into a chocolate cake for your family? And I had actually gotten that question in various forms before, because people have this sort of, idea about eating ashes, basically, and do they taste good? So what I decided to do is I do have cremated remains in my house, but obviously I wasn't going to use real cremated remains, so I sort of made faux mains, which are from clay and from various other substances that sort of mimicked the texture, and I baked them. I baked a cup of them into a Host Duncan Hines cake from the supermarket, and frosted it, and ate it on camera, and it was disgusting.
Yes.
It was disgusting. So the moral of the story is that it is doable. I mean, it kind of looked like a cake. Like, it was the texture was very normal, but it wouldn't, if you were having like a beautiful ritual where your family, consumed your final remains, they would all sort of screw up their faces and spit it out and stuff, which wouldn't be the romantic idea that you probably had of them eating your remains. So.
Like I said,
to do that.
If you go to the YouTube video and watch it, you're looking in her face when you bit into it for the first time was like, that's all you need to know.
I expected it to be more integrated than that. Like, I didn't expect it to taste as much like sand as it did. So my reaction was I actually cut out a lot of my spitting, and there was a lot more that I left out.
So where can somebody get the recipe for faux mains?
I could post that on my website. I don't know if there hasn't been a real demand for it, but I would be more than happy to encourage. Well, also just encouraging people to come up with new things to do with cremated remains, because everything's so sort of entry level as far as what we do now with cremated remains. There's some interesting things like shooting them into space or putting them in fireworks, but other than that, it's kind of like did you know that you can have a Baltimore Orioles urn for your Baltimore Orioles fan? It's like, yes, we know that, thank you. So yeah, if you're making fake cremated remains to create new fascinating ways to I'd rather you do that than eat them, just because it's going to be a better outcome. But yeah, there should be foamains available for the young inventor.
Well, I know that one of the big ones that people do now is create diamonds out of them.
Mm-hmm. It's a big one. I think it's a big one in the media, just because it's so different. I don't know if there's actually, I haven't had a lot of clients who have had a huge demand for death diamonds. But I think it's fascinating. I think the more that there are interesting options and artistic options around the actual physical remains, the better, because it sort of shows that we're in this sort of new culture. That's the first time we've ever been in it, where we can actually make decisions about our rituals. It's not determined entirely by religion or entirely by the culture that we live in. We have all this sort of freedom to really redefine how we're working with death, which is amazing and should be exploited a little more than it is. I think that before you die, you should have a conversation with the people that you love and really think about what you want. And, ideally, I would love for you to be creative like that, but you don't have to be creative as long as it's something that you've really seriously discussed and thought about and had an open discussion about.
Also, how often does a pacemaker explode in the cremation chamber?
Very rarely, because everyone's incredibly vigilant about it. I don't know if it's like an urban legend at this point that they explode. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's real, but the way that everybody treats it, it's like, it's going to be the apocalypse if one gets through. So yes, we're very vigilant about, even if we asked you to check on the form whether or not there's a pacemaker, but we also check each person who's going into the crematory chamber to make sure that they don't have, the little telltale outline of the pacemaker on their chest, because the legend is, or the fact is, that they explode because of all the batteries in them. So there's a lot of points during the cremation where, as a crematory operator, you open the door a little bit and you look in to see how it's going and you facilitate it if you need to. And if you're doing that at the moment that a pacemaker explodes, tales go that your face gets blown off. I don't have any tangible tales of people's face getting blown off. Maybe I'll Google that, and that's a real thing, but I think that's the idea. And it can ruin the crematory retort as well. So pacemakers are just the persona non grata of the crematory world. You don't want them to exist.
On the video thing, your very first episode, you had Rigor Morris, your snake. How is he doing? I'm chilling next to him right now. He's sitting right next to me in the cage, right at my feet. Yeah, he's good. He got fed yesterday, so he's feeling pretty plump and satisfied with himself. Got himself a new mouse?
Yes, got himself 3 new mice, actually.
Oh, 3. Yeah. He's a pig.
He's big. Yeah, he's getting a lot bigger. Yeah, he's moved up the mice scale. I'm afraid to go rat though, because I've heard, and this might be a sort of pacemaker legend, but I've heard that the rats have a better ability to fight back. They can perhaps injure the snake. So I've just upped the mice.
What is the most common question you get overall?
Let's see. Overall, I get a lot of how do I be a mortician? How do I become a mortician? I get a lot of, it's not the exact same question, but in the vein of, I want to do this totally ridiculous thing with my dead body or my parents' dead body. Is it legal? Can I do this? And very, very unfortunately, a lot of times the answer is no. You can't just keep your mother's skeleton in your house. You can't, keep the skull on the mantelpiece. You can't just go out into the wilderness and die. There's all these things that you can't do because our death system is so highly regulated. And I hate sort of being the bearer of bad news on that. I feel like, wah, wah. Because here I am sort of advocating for all of these new creative body disposals and ways of death, and then, having to tell people, like, oh, but you can't actually do that. But in a way, hopefully that inspires people, as it inspires me, to work towards getting things changed.
Yes, I was going to ask about that. That there's been all the hubbub about the different ways to get buried. Mm-hmm. And so what is your take on all those different methods that people argue or discuss? Because a lot of places don't allow you to do natural burial. You have to have it put into like certified caskets? And what is your take on that quote unquote battle?
Well, I'm very, as far as natural burial goes, I'm 100% team natural burial. I think that, because up until about 75 years ago, natural burial was just burial,
Yeah.
It wasn't natural burial, it wasn't like some sort of fad. And I think it is unfortunate that, that things like natural burial and things like alkaline hydrolysis, which is the dissolving the body in lye and things like that, are sort of seen a little bit as fads, which is really unfortunate because, something like Forbes will do a big piece and it will be like, natural burial's the new thing, kids. But then you can't actually get it. It's not like something that's as readily available as it should be. And the worst thing would be for it to be considered some sort of fad because it's so much more beneficial for the environment than the way that we currently do death, which is, the embalming and the big casket and the big vault underground, which is it's just sort of like throwing waste unless you have a real mental reason that all of those trappings are very, very helpful for you. It's just kind of just throwing resources into the ground, as opposed to the benefits that I think from natural burial, where you're just putting your body back into the earth and you're saying, hey, I consider myself part of the natural system of things, and I want animals to eat me the same way that I've been eating animals my whole life. I want my bacteria to burst out and just kind of shoot back into the universe, and those things I find very positive, and that's my mental state, and that also affects the way that you look at the world. So as far as natural burial, I'm very much for it. I'm very much for all of the new sort of death fads too, just because, if anything, they're a harbinger for the fact that people want something different, that people really want a change, and they want to start looking at death differently, and they want to explore new frontiers with how we're handling our mortality. So I think, there's some tacky things slip through the cracks, as with anything, but for the most part, I think it's positive.
Oh, yeah, because one of the ones you mentioned on your YouTube was the liquefaction of the bodies.
Liquefaction, body liquefaction.
Yeah.
And that's actually, it's weird because a lot of people just say, like, why wouldn't you just cremate them? We have those already. Why create this whole new, lye, body dissolving machine? And, I guess the argument is that there's emissions from crematories that wouldn't be present in this new machine. And the people, I think that anybody who has a new way of death disposition that really believes in it should have a marketplace to present it and to convince the public that without too much, as long as they can prove that it's not dangerous to the public, or it's not, it's not unethical in any way, that states and countries really should be open to allowing it to be adopted and allowing the sort of marketplace to take care of it, as opposed to state regulations to take care of it.
Well, I always find it fun, like you mentioned before, you can't go out in the wilderness and die. It's like, well, how are they going to ever enforce that? I did something illegal, but I'm dead.
Right. Well, the thing is, though, that they would find you, I think about that all the time. I would love to just be, to go out into the woods somewhere and be eaten by bugs, be eaten by a bear, be eaten by vultures. That sounds wonderful to me. That makes me very happy. But if I go out and do that, they're going to look for me. They're not going to just be like, oh, can't find Caitlin. Whoops. They're going to look for me, and that's going to be a huge amount of resources. And when they find me, they're going to take me to the coroner's office. They're going to autopsy me. They're going to do all these things that I didn't want them to do in the first place. So unless I'm very, very good at hiding myself, and, say I'm one afternoon I'm in LA and then take a fake named flight to Montana and go deep into the woods and, do it, and I'm incredibly good at it, it's going to be hard to work out, because they will look for you. They will do the things that you didn't want them to do with your body once they find you.
Not only
the
that,
way the system is now.
I'm sure one of the biggest reasons is that all the wasted resources they would spend trying to find you.
Yeah, exactly, which kind of counteracts the effects of just going out in the woods and dying. So it's kind of you end up, nobody wins in that situation. So, but ultimately, I hope very much so that, in my fantasy universe, when I am old and fabulously wealthy for some reason. I'm not sure how that's going to happen yet, but, I would love to have a natural burial cemetery where there's also something like an open-air pyre, and a place where people could just be laid out, a couple acres where they could just be laid out to decompose naturally, even above ground. I think that all those things are fascinating, and I would love to have a place where we could fight to make that possible.
I guess the best thing you can do these days then is to donate your body to the body farm.
Right, which is another but there's something to be said. There's some people who have the mindset that donating their body to science is a wonderful thing, and I totally support that. But there are some people who want it to be more ritualistic in a way, so they don't want it to be studied. They just want their body to be left alone and decay naturally. And I'm sort of on the fence about that. I'm definitely all for science, but I'm not entirely sure that I would want my body donated to science just because I'm such a pro ritual person. I'm such a pro, family being involved and this elaborate processes. I love that. So I think for me, I would like that, but I'm absolutely for people who say, just take my body away, take it to be poked and prodded, and if it can be for the good of the world, let's do it.
What is your favorite death-related subject then?
Don't.
Come on.
No, you can't do that to me. That's terrible. It's a terrible question. Okay. Oh my gosh. I don't know. Maybe the natural decomposition. Maybe like the art of throwing a body out into the world and the sort of science and beauty in how that happens and how your body goes back to the world. But that's this month. That's this month. I can't promise you that answer will be the same.
Yeah, so the answer would be quote unquote living.
Yes, the answer would be life after death.
Yeah.
In its scientific form, in the sort of how the earth takes your body and creates new life.
So, what is your take on things like the goth culture? Because I'm sure you get a lot of those questions.
Yeah, I mean, I was I don't know if I would ever say that I was a goth per se. I definitely was into, when I lived in Hawaii as a teenager, I was definitely into, I would go to goth clubs, and I still go to dark goth clubs occasionally because I love the music and I love the culture. I don't know if I think that real goths, would agree that I'm not seriously devoted enough to be self-identified in that way. But I think there's a lot to be said for people's desire to immerse themselves in the macabre, and I certainly love goths. God bless them, everyone. And I like the culture a lot. I just don't know if I would identify that way. But I mean, there are obviously overlaps. There. I think those are pretty evident, the overlaps in what I do and in goth culture.
I imagine I've seen your videos. You might be a little too happy.
Yeah, although a lot of the goths that I've seen, they're incredibly happy. They take big trips to Disneyland with each other, and have bring your goth baby to the Discovery Zone Day and stuff. It's like they're actually incredibly. And I'd like to think that that's proof of my posit that death. Thinking about death a lot can actually make you very happy and can actually enhance your lives in a lot of ways.
All right, so the cheesy pop culture question of the interview.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Vampires, sparkly or traditional?
Oh, traditional, obviously, but usually my impetus is to be like, throw some sparkles on it, no matter what it is.
Well, your videos have a lot of sparkles, so.
Yeah, exactly. No matter what it is, throw some sparkles on it. But if we're saying if it's like Edward Cullen versus like Nosferatu, obviously I'm gonna have to go traditional.
Very cool. So thank you so much for taking some time.
Yeah, thank you.
Where can people find you? Are you going to do you do anything other than your day job? Do you go to any conventions or anything like that? I'm going to start doing more of that. I've been so busy recently that I have just sort of hunch over my computer with crazy shifty eyes. But yes, I'm definitely going to start doing more of that. But on the interweb, I am very available. Order of the Good Death or YouTube, Ask a Mortician, Order of the Good Death. Very cool. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, thank you, sir.
And
we'll talk soon.
Have a fun Halloween.
Yes, to you and yours. Your
Cool.
family and yours this Halloween.
I hope that everybody listening has a good All Hallows Eve, no matter how you tend to celebrate it. And make sure you to run over to show notes for this episode so you can check out all of Caitlin's videos and read more about the Order of the Good Death. Also, all of the other show notes and links you just heard about on this episode at our website, www.skepticality.com.
Hungry for more skepticism? Want to learn the truth about the scientific controversies of our time? Then subscribe to Skeptic, the quarterly magazine Stephen Jay Gould called the best journal in the field. To subscribe, visit skeptic.com today.